Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be talking about the new legendary ring, and there's two specific things. First of all, of course, we've got the proc. It is it's a very big proc actually, and also the fact that these might be upgradable items. We don't 100% for sure know, but there has actually been some really cool data mine information that suggests that they might actually be upgradable over the duration of the patch. But first of all, let's talk just a little bit about the idea of it, well, not actually having a proc and instead having an on-use ability, and that on-use ability not being something that you will in all likelihood actually have any control over. It's kind of odd. So in case you're not aware, I will flash them up on the video, but basically they are raid-wide cooldowns. So for an example, if you are wearing the DPS ring and another DPSer uses their ring, then everyone wearing the ring will get the buff. And the way that I read it, essentially, the buff, if you activate it on your ring, it will then activate on anyone's ring who is within 20 yards of you, and then anyone who is within 20 yards of them, so it will kind of spread throughout the whole raid. I know a bunch of people were really concerned about the idea of the range of this being an issue, so what if I'm 30 yards away from the person who first uses it? That shouldn't actually be an issue with the way that they've worded it here, which is definitely a good thing. I don't really think it would have been a good idea if range was a massive issue. I'd say it's a raid-wide cooldown, so click it and it should go. What's also kind of cool is that after the big cooldown happens, the big ability happens, you essentially it pulls up loads of damage and then everyone explodes, which deals damage to all of your enemies, which is equivalent to 25% of all the damage that you dealt while you're empowered, and there are similar enough effects for the other different kinds of rings. So what's odd about this is that it's basically a raid-wide cooldown, and that is, I think, both good and bad. First of all, the good of it. Well, the good of it is that it does add a little bit more of a sort of cooperative slant onto the game. It adds a bit of a new mechanic, a new thing to coordinate with, and I suppose that is more stuff to think about, which could be construed as a good thing. However, here's what I'd say. Because it is a raid-wide cooldown, in all likelihood, at least for, I'd say at least for the healers, definitely for the healers, perhaps for the DPS, depending on when damage is needed during a fight. This is the kind of thing that will be controlled by someone who is not the DPSer, like someone else, so to speak. So you'll probably have, in the same way that you've got, say, that shaman who always does heroism, you'll probably have that DPS person who's in control of when the raid activates the, that role-specific buff from the legendary ring. So in all likelihood, you will basically not notice this when you're in a raiding context. I think that's a little bit of a pity. One thing that could have been a lot of fun is having an on-use where you could line it up with your own class's cooldowns and do all of that stuff, but the thing is, if you line it up with your cooldowns and hit the button, it's going to hit everyone else's button, which A, might not be perfect for them, and B, it might not even be the part of the fight where your raid leader wants you to have that proc, or that buff going on. So I think it's a really cool idea, and I love the idea of course fostering cooperation between people via mechanics, and yeah, from that perspective it is cool, but realistically I actually don't think this is the best way that they could have went. I really would have preferred it if this was just a really cool on-use effect that applied to only you. That way you would have some control over it, and you'd really be able to line up with your class and I think have a lot of fun with it. Another, I suppose, issue, and this is something that could absolutely be fixed easily, is that its buff is just a 25% damage dealt increase, and I've got to admit that's a wee bit boring to me. If you look at, say, heroism, I think one of the reasons why heroism is so fun is because, boom, you get a giant haste buff, all your abilities are flying off, you're generating loads of resources, you're spending loads of resources. Those abilities that are usually big, long casts, no, they're just flying out. And it feels great, it feels really powerful in comparison to, I think, the norm of what your class feels like. That's why a cooldown like that, or say rapid fire on a hunter, it can be really good. Now, this won't really be noticed. You'll do bigger numbers, but you won't really see much of a gameplay effect. Obviously, they couldn't do another haste buff because that's already covered, and having 25% haste from this and 40% from your heroism would be kind of insane. It would push you way above the global cooldown, and it would be very odd. But yeah, I'd say some sort of proc that's gameplay effective would be really nice. And I guess what is cool is that at the very end, we do see this big explosion that comes out, and you know what? I think that is nifty as hell, and it's probably going to look really awesome when the whole raid just explodes in good damage. Though I do have to wonder what it's going to be like for people with low-end computers, so if you are in that situation, yeah, it might be worth dialing down the graphical effects. Now, this is, I think, a better design when you take into account the idea of just solo play when you're out in the world, because it gives you another cooldown which you can use whenever you want. It's essentially all of the benefits of it while in a raid context without the downside of you have no control over it. That's definitely a very good thing, and it's going to add a little bit more stuff to do in the open world. Now, also on the topic of raids, this is such a big level of power that pretty much encounters will have to be balanced around it, because this is just a new raid-wide cooldown. It's going to be extremely powerful, and if the fights were not balanced around it from the get-go, then I think we would have some serious difficulty-related issues in terms of the balancing. So what I actually suspect, and the main reason for this is because these are actually apparently upgradable based on the data mining information, but I expect that we will get the first version of the legendary ring that comes equipped with the full proc pretty much near the very start of the raid tier. A bit like with how we got our Timeless Isle or our Mist of Pandaria cloak, essentially instantaneously when 5.4 dropped. Because if you think about it, in a raid, if you're in the situation where half your raid members have the ring and half don't, the power difference between them is going to be really, really, really big, and that really is going to, I think, be doubly more important when you take into account that it is a raid-wide effect. If someone doesn't have it, then an entire raid-wide cooldown just doesn't apply to them. So it's definitely something that will essentially be mandatory, and the fights will be balanced around it, which probably means that the net difference won't be particularly massive. Though what will happen is that if you're heading back into Blackrock Foundry or anything like that with these rings on, you're going to wreck things, because those encounters were not designed with the idea of basically having, a second heroism. They weren't designed with that idea in mind, so it's going to be very powerful for going back to the old raids. However, there may not be a massive amount of point to that because of just, the way that they do gearing between raid tiers these days. However, if you are maybe wanting to get a chance of, say, the mythic Blackrock Foundry mount, then maybe these rings will help you out quite a bit. Now, moving on to the idea of upgrades, well, essentially, MMO Champion data mined the original ring as being item level 735. This is essentially the same as Hellfire Citadel Mythic difficulty. However, they have also data mined a ring which is item level 790, and they data mined versions of the ring with 3 item level increments between 735 and 790, which to me basically says there'll be some way of upgrading this 3 goes at a time, and this I think does make a lot of sense. Every part of the legendary quest has had some sort of retention mechanic. Personally, I don't think they're very fun. I think they're extremely cynical. The idea of going into LFRs just to get your elemental cookies for, to feed Khadgar so he'll make you a better ring. But one of the issues with actually giving out the full legendary item at the very start of the tier is that they miss out on that maybe 12 to whatever amount of weeks of players sort of farming up content for legendary quest tokens. So what I'd say they will probably do is give you the initial thing, but still have the legendary quest or some sort of mechanic function in a way that, week to week you're able to upgrade your ring to make it better and better and better and better in terms of item level. That basically means that there are no downsides in terms of players that start off this raid tier not having access to this powerful raid-wide cooldown, which, let's face it, will pretty much be essential. They won't have that issue, and simultaneously, if they allow upgrades, it will be excellent for player retention. I think we definitely saw in Siege of Orgrimmar that with them adding in the item level upgrades, then extending the upgrades and doing various things like that, it did serve to increase player retention, absolutely. And with this being the legendary item, a part of the legendary quest, I'd say it makes a lot of sense. Now, what would you actually upgrade them with? And that's a very good question. I haven't seen anything similar to the High Mall Stones or the Blackrock Foundry elemental cookie thingies, but there could still be an equivalent to that in this patch that you turn into Khadgar, and whenever you turn them in, maybe he upgrades your ring a little bit. That could be a thing that happens. Alternatively, they could upgrade it via something entirely differently. Perhaps say, I don't know, Apex's crystals. I don't think Apex's crystals would work because people can pull up 20,000 of them at the minute, which would likely mean that people would hop into the patch and just dump loads of upgrades on the thing. So if they were to do upgrades via Apex's crystals, it would probably be a weekly kind of deal. Though honestly, if they want this to be a retention mechanic, then I don't think Apex's crystals are the best way to go. However, if you look into Nan Jungle, I mean, right now, you've got your rares, you've got your treasures, and the only other thing that you've got in terms of, like, daily content, or, you know, things to do, is Apex's missions in the exact same vein as patch 6.0, so clearly they still are planning on Apex's being decently relevant coming into this patch. I suppose they could also have some sort of way of upgrading them where you could get a currency from either the raid, you can maybe get a currency from doing mythic dungeons or heroic dungeons, and then spend that currency with a weekly cap on actually, you know, upgrading the ring. That's basically Valor points. Just gonna point that out there. Apexis, I don't think, was really much of a replacement, and it does feel like the gameplay that Valor points kind of encouraged is maybe missed in a way. Perhaps, just a point that flew into my head. But regardless, I think that if they are going to have a retention mechanic, and they're going to have a really powerful raid-wide cooldown associated with the ring, then the best way to do it is give people the base ring with the cooldown, and then let them pad the item level up to a sort of legendary level after the fact. I'm pretty happy with the way that they seem to have decided to do that, but obviously we will have to wait. This is all PTR, everything could change, and the ring could be completely different. However, it does seem like all of their designs are around some sort of cooperative mechanic, and they did say this is their most recent iteration of it back when they actually showed it off via, I think it was via Twitter, where they just gave a confirmation of the procs. Anyway, that's basically it for me. Do let me know what you're thinking about the Legendary Ring and just patch 6.2 in general, and specifically if there's anything within patch 6.2 that you would like to maybe have me look at in a video, then let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.